Vikings Valhalla dropped earlier this year to much fanfare. Fans of the original show were delighted to receive the spin-off, which saw a ton of action and drama as the Vikings took their revenge on the English. However, some historians have argued that a lot of the show's material might have been embellished a little. Others say a lot. Today we're discussing the most historically inaccurate things about Vikings Valhalla. Stay with us. First up, let's discuss what went down in the Netflix drama. Well, Vikings Valhalla dropped back in February, and a documentary it was not. The story starts with the St. Brice's Day massacre in 1002 AD, which is historically accurate enough, as that all happened. But the Danes' response, and how all that went down, was a little far-fetched. King Ethelred slaughtered thousands of Danes, so in response, King Canute assembled an invasion fleet in Denmark. Simultaneously, Leif Erikson and Freydis Eriksdottir are pulling into the harbor, just as the Danes are preparing to invade. Freydis is hell-bent on finding the man who raped and disfigured her. After Freydis kills the man, her brother Leif is forced to serve the king and captain a boat across the North Sea to England as her punishment. On the orders of Jarl Hakon, Leif comes into his own on the mission and is instrumental in bringing down London Bridge while in England, while Freydis has stayed behind to go on a pilgrimage to Uppsala, but is attacked en route by a berserker sent to hunt pagans by Jarl Care. She kills the man, much to the ire of Care, and takes shelter in Uppsala. Back in England, Olaf steals a march on Canute and heads back to Scandinavia after the success of the invasion, but he has treachery on his mind. He attempts to overthrow Canute's father, Sweyn Forkbeard, while the pair are still in England. However, the king gets word of the ploy and rallies the troops, heading back to Kattegat just in time. Harold and Freydis escape, while Olaf does too, setting up an interesting Season 2. So what actually happened? Stay tuned to find out. Of course, as with many historical shows, you have to suspend disbelief. So how did it really go down? The show's writers have compressed a lot of historical characters into one person, while there is also quite a bit of timeline crossover, which means the drama is ramped right up. As we mentioned, the St. Brice's Day massacre actually took place on November 13th, 1002, with King Sweyn Forkbeard's own sister, Gunhild, thought to be amongst the victims. However, the writers haven't bothered with this detail for some reason, and we only meet King Sweyn halfway through the first season. We also have a historical record of Ethelred's thoughts on the Danes, whom he compared to a cockle amongst the wheat. In following Ethelred's writings, he uses terminology such as extermination, which gives us a better idea of what he thought of the Danes. He also claimed that Jesus himself would have sanctioned the massacre. Wow! Skeletons have been found across England over the years, which are thought to belong to the victims of the massacre, and chemical analysis has all but confirmed those thoughts, which suggests that those buried in multiple mass graves across England actually are Viking warriors, and Ethelred's hospitality wasn't just extended to the fighting men. Anyone unlucky enough to be in the vicinity was slaughtered, men and children alike. Lovely! What do you know about the St. Brice's Day massacre? Let us know below. We're talking Leif and the Greenlanders now. Stay with us. As we mentioned earlier, Freydis and Leif are pulling into port as Canute is assembling his invasion force, but you could almost consign this to the never happened category. Leif grew up in Iceland with Freydis and is also thought to have stepped on the North American continent much before Columbus did, but there is no evidence that he was in Denmark at the same time as Canute. One big storyline involving Leif suggests he had a big hand in bringing down London Bridge, separating King Edmund and then capturing him. However, this probably never happened either, as multiple historical sources believe that Leif wouldn't have been in England at the time of the invasion. King Edmund would never have served as a puppet of King Canute either, and by most historical accounts was actually quite a brave man, so his portrayal in Valhalla wasn't particularly accurate. Which brings us on to Freydis. The show claims that she and Harald were involved romantically, but given the fact that there were more than 40 years separating them in age, then we can probably bust this myth too. She is also once thought to have slaughtered 5 female villagers during the colonization of North America, suggesting that her moral compass wasn't quite pointing in the same direction as her fictitious counterpart. What did you guys make of Leif and the Greenlanders? Give us your thoughts below. Next, we're discussing Harald and Canute. Stay tuned. The idea that Harald took part in the 1016 invasion of England, as the show suggests, is also nonsense, as he would have been 1 year old at the time. We're not even certain if a young Harald would have ever even met King Canute, as he was only a young man of about 20 when the legendary king died. The show says that Canute invaded England in 1016, which suggests that it took him 14 years to respond to the massacre of his people. It's universally accepted that even during those pre-medieval times, when it would have taken a while to amass invasion forces, it wouldn't have taken this long. Most historians believe that the Danes waged their retaliatory invasion just a year later, in 1003, but we're not sure why the show decided to leave such a huge gap between these events of St. Bryce's Day and the invasion. Some have said that it was to include Harold in the invasion, but even this doesn't make much sense, as he would have been just a baby during the invasion. I mean, we know the Vikings were tough, but we're not sure that extended to babies. It's also thought that King Sweyn Forkbeard himself would have led the invasion, given the fact that his own sister was murdered at the hands of Ethelred, which we also mentioned earlier. The show failed to detail. What did you make of the perceived relationship between Canute and Harald? And what about Jarl Håkon? Let's see. Well, this one's a little odd, as the original Jarl Håkon was, as you probably know, a man. In the show, Håkon is portrayed by a black actress, Caroline Henderson, so you can imagine why fans were scratching their heads at the portrayal of a white Scandinavian male ruler. As we know, the Vikings were utter pests around Europe from as early as the 9th century, but historians aren't quite sure if they would have gotten to the shores of North Africa. We know they definitely got to Paris, down the Seine, and even further into Eastern Europe, down the Danube, but neither of these rivers connect to the Mediterranean, so it would have meant they would have to go all the way around Portugal, which there is no evidence of. Historians think they probably did own slaves, which more than likely would have been acquired by trade with Europe, and of course, some slave owners probably had relations with their slaves. However, the idea that a female slave or the offspring of a slave could rise to such a high rank back in the 11th century Scandinavia is most certainly incorrect. Of course, this is clearly a terrible time period, and slave owning is definitely categorically wrong, but you cannot diversify history. The Vikings are known to have had strict succession rules, so a black female ruler just isn't historically accurate. What did you make of Jarl Håkon? And finally, what about all the religious stuff? You probably noticed that Olaf is quite into his religion and loves a spot of pagan persecution. He even refuses to fight alongside them, which when you're heading into battle is unbelievably stubborn. Olaf was actually into religion, so much that he was posthumously awarded a sainthood, and the Norwegians also took him as their patron saint. Crazy! There were definitely opposing religions back in the 11th century Scandinavia, but a lot of them probably lived peacefully, side by side, and then a move towards Christianity wouldn't have happened nearly as quickly as the show suggests. It seems as though Olaf himself is also aware of the benefits of living peacefully, as he chooses free trade rather than all-out war during the first season. There undoubtedly would have been religious violence during this time, but it wouldn't have been on a scale that the show suggests, and there almost certainly weren't bands of Christians baying for pagan blood roaming across Scandinavia. Of course, we know that the show has to cram in as much as possible to increase the action, but this all comes at the expense of historical accuracy, unfortunately. What did you make of Olaf's crusade against the pagans? Let us know below. As usual, thanks for joining us today, and remember to tune in again next time when we'll be discussing more cool stuff. And why not do us a favor by liking and sharing today's video, while also subscribing to our channel so you don't miss out on more great videos like this. Bye guys!